Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel, and today in this video we'll be covering actually my round 4 game from a tournament I just finished yesterday. It was the Kings Island Open, and my USCF rating, this was an over-the-board tournament. My USCF rating at the time was 1887. So I'm playing the white pieces, and let's take a look at what happened. D4, E6. So from E6, honestly black has a lot of options here. So I play C4, which I did in the game. Black can transpose back into a Queen's Gambit decline. They can go for a Nimzo Indian with knight F6, and then after knight C3 you can play bishop B4, pinning the knight to the king, and then you have knight D4 ideas in the future with B6 and bishop B7 to support. Or after E6 you can even go for F5 options. So there's a lot of options here pretty much for black. It's really flexible. So here I play C4, and my opponent goes back into the Queen's Gambit decline, play knight C3, and here my opponent actually goes for the Semislav, which is another variation from this. Here I play E3 to support this pawn on C4, because typically after knight F6, I play bishop G5, and you can't actually take, because here I play something like E3 for example, or if I want E4 is even possible, and then I can win back this pawn. There is no B5 to protect this pawn because I have knight takes. But after C6, I have to block in this bishop, which I usually don't want to, because if I don't, and let's say I play something like bishop F4 after takes, and let's say E3, you do have B5 here, because the C6 pawn actually supports the B5 pawn. And if I play A4, this is also a possible variation with these two pawns hanging. But however, here there is the move bishop to A6, and if I capture on B4, well actually there is simply bishop captures on B4 and I just lose a piece. So going back, here I play E3, so I can support this pawn. So if takes, then I can simply develop my bishop, developing another piece. Knight F6, knight F3, bishop E7, bishop D3, all pretty standard. And typically after I move my bishop in the Queen's Gambit decline or any system like this, after I move my bishop, usually that's when black resolves the tension, because you can play this tempo move B5. After bishop D3, you can play B4. And then you can get some position like this with, let's say, bishop B7, or alternatively here, sometimes there's like C5 options as well. This is also a completely playable. Actually here that doesn't really work because I forgot there is simply bishop E4 winning a rook. So I guess C5 not here, but there are a lot, but it's very playable for both sides after something like knight BD7 to support the knight on F6. So going back, bishop D3 takes. Here my opponent castles, which is fine. Castle, knight B to D7, queen E2, supporting this bishop. And here rook E8 is a little bit odd. Typically, I would say, more common would be something like B5. And after bishop to D3, now you can go for B4. And after knight E4, now you can go for something like C5. Because now if you trade, knight take, oops, sorry. Now, because there is no knight takes on F6 followed by bishop E4, because you simply have knight captures on F6. And alternatively, if you play bishop takes, then after bishop to E4, you do have something like rook B8. So going back, but instead my opponent opts for rook E8, which is a bit strange. Here I play rook FD1, putting my rook opposite the queen, and I'm thinking about E4 ideas at some point. Here bishop D2, just getting my final pieces into the game. Also I should mention that knight F8 is not really it's a kind of a strange move because you're putting your knight on a very passive square. So here H6, which is equally strange. I thought my opponent at some point would go for B5. This makes a bit more logical sense because this is the main plan in the Semislav anyway. But instead H6, here I play A3. My idea is to play B4. And alternatively, I had visions of playing something like queen D2 and playing E4, but I realized here there is bishop to B4. And if I play A3, there is like knight E4. I can't take this because there is bishop captures on D2. And so after I move my queen, then after we trade, then I mean, my position is still better because of how passive this knight is and how blocked in this bishop is. But this, like, I still have to actually try and win this game. Like, my opponent has C5 options here to open up the bishop and then bring in their knight, or even bring their knight into G6. So I still have to actually win this game. So instead I played A3 so that I can play queen D2 and play E4 and open up the center with D5. But here my opponent plays A5, logical move. However, here I play queen d2. My idea is to try to go e4 and play for d5. Here b5 was played, which I also saw because white. This is like the main plan in the semi-slot. You're trying to get some counterplay on the queen side with b5, a5, b4, and try to break open the queen side. Here I play bishop d3. Thinking about knight e4 options, and also there is the move knight e5 at some point because you can't actually kick away the knight. Here queen b6. I realize that my opponent's plan is to go for b4, but that isn't really possible because if, let's say, I play something like h3 and you go for b4, then here I have the very nice move knight a4, and after queen c7, I can put my knight on the c5 square, and you can capture and capture again. But here I simply have like rook takes. I'm triple attacking this pawn. If you play a4, this is a massive weakness. I can target with bishop c2. I can play queen b4. I can even double up or take control of the b file. I can put my knight on e5. There are a lot of options here for me to play. So instead, here I just play knight e5. Again, there is no b4 because I have knight a4 and then I can put my knight on c5. And this is an even better version because both my knights are targeting this bishop on d7. So instead, here my opponent plays bishop d6, logical move, trying to remove this knight. And here I play the very nice move, knight e4. The idea with knight e4 is I'm willing to sacrifice my pawn structure, but however, here I'm attacking this pawn. Here, there are two main ways to defend this pawn. One is to play a4, which my opponent did in the game, and the other is to play rook a8. If you play rook a8, I'm pretty sure this is just really passive for black, and honestly speaking, it doesn't look too good. Like here I saw some idea with like queen d6 potentially, or even playing like queen d4, which is something else I saw, trying to trade off the queens, and I can target this weak c6 pawn. These were all ideas I potentially saw. And also keep in mind, this knight and this bishop, which I had seen by opening up the d file, this knight can never move because it will hang this bishop. So here my opponent plays a4. This I also saw, and here I realized that since black has traded off their dark squared bishop for my knight on e5, here I realized that after a4, this structure here perfectly allows me to take advantage of these dark square weaknesses, namely along this diagonal. So here I immediately plunge my queen into the d6 square. Black's main idea here is to untangle, is to play c5, because you'll notice that here, black's position is honestly quite cramped. This knight can't move because it will hang this bishop. These two rooks are staring at pawns. You could take over the file. And this queen isn't really staring at anything. All of these squares are like controlled by pawns. You can't go to a5. You go to c7. I can just honestly play f4 and defend this pawn, and you're not really getting anywhere. So the best try for black is to play c5, and then try to trade off the bishops. At which point you can try to bring in your knight. You can open up the d file for your rooks and try to play for an advantage. Also considering white has the double pawns here, by untangling black's position, black should probably at some point become better. However, here I play the move queen d6. This stops c5 because then I can simply take the queen on b6. So here I calculated that, so rook c d8 was what my opponent played. If my opponent played rook e d8, I calculated bishop to b4. And you can't play bishop to e8 to try to attack my queen because here this knight is actually undefended, and I can play queen captures on f8, which is actually mate. This bishop on e4 controls the h7 square, so the king can't actually run away. Alternatively, my opponent plays the other rook here, so here I still play bishop b4. If you play bishop to c8, I can simply capture on c6, because this bishop actually serves an important purpose of defending this pawn. And here also, it may look like I can actually capture this pawn, but that would actually be a massive blunder. Bishop captures on c6, bishop takes. Now my queen is under fire, so I have to take with the queen. If I take with the rook, then my opponent can simply play rook captures on d6. If I take the queen, then rook takes, then I'm down a rook here. And alternatively, after queen takes, here there's a lot of ways to win. You can, the easiest is queen captures on c6 after rook takes, and rook captures on d1. Here I'm also down a rook. In fact, that's probably even worse because after king f1, you can double up your rooks, and this is completely losing. I'm down a rook primarily, but also because I'm in a very passive spot. So here I played bishop b4. Again, bishop c8 doesn't do anything. Then I can capture the pawn because black no longer has the bishop defending the pawn on c6. And here I have various threats. Honestly, the main threat is that I have a very nice position. These two rooks are very nicely placed, putting pressure down the d and c files. This bishop here is putting pressure on the c6 pawn. And also my bishop and my queen here, they're lined up very nicely to pressure this f8 square so that this bishop and these two rooks can't move very easily. c5 is never a possibility. My rook, my bishop, and my queen all control that square. And I'm planning at some point to maybe remove my queen from the d6 square, put my bishop there, or even in some scenario, let's say rook a8, just playing some random moves here, or even in some scenario, I can play bishop captures on f8. After rook takes, I can even play queen captures on d7. And here I'm simply winning a piece. And you can't trap my queen because after queen to e7, I can simply bring my queen back to b4. And after we trade rooks, here I emerge simply up a bishop. So instead, going back, so at this point, this is a very nice position. In fact, the computer thinks this is actually a plus like 2.5 position for white already, despite even material, because of the simple like fact that white has a very nice position and it has like complete positional dominance in this game. So here my opponent plays queen a6, quite the odd move in my opinion. I didn't really know what this accomplished, so I just continued with my main plan that I saw. I had envisioned that obviously I can't take on c6, so because of this rook being undefended on d1. So I played rook d2 here. So now the rook is protected by my bishop on b4. So now I can actually capture on c6, because after we trade everything. But here, however, rook captures on d2 can be met by bishop captures on d2. Rook e8 looks like you can get into the back rank, but here I can simply play rook c2, and then I can simply bring my king in, and I'm up a pawn here. So this should be completely winning. Alternatively, so here my opponent plays rook c8, which makes sense, trying to defend the pawn. And here I play rook d to c2. Better, honestly, would have been to play rook c to d1. Triple up on this file, and this brings even more like dominance onto the d file, which is the only file that is open. And I can probably crash through here. If you play something like rook e8, I can honestly, computer is suggesting something like h4 or f4, or even g4, basically to start launching a kingside attack, because I already have massive control over, honestly speaking, all 5 of these files, A to E files. So now I simply have to break through on the king side, and I will be completely winning. However, here I focus on the queen side. I basically gang up on this pawn, because also I have to keep in mind at this point I'm somewhat low on time because I spent a lot of time calculating all of these variations and evaluating the position. So the simplest plan I saw was to outright just win this c6 pawn. So here after rook e8, rook e d8, sorry, I still can't capture on c6 because after bishop takes, my queen is under attack, and I can't take this bishop with the queen because there's simply rook captures on c6 and I'd be completely losing. So instead I go for a different play, which is to play queen d2. My idea is to play bishop a5 and target this rook, or even play bishop to e7. So in some scenario I can play bishop e7, and after you move the rook I can take this bishop, take this knight, and after king takes, then I can take on e7, and I am up a piece. Instead, however, so here my opponent plays bishop e8, and I immediately put my bishop on d6. This was a plan I mentioned earlier. Now this bishop's on a very nice outpost square. You can't play knight d7 trying to reactivate your knight, because I can simply capture this pawn on c6. Here, so my opponent plays knight g6. I play queen b4. There was a threat here of playing knight takes on e5, because I can't take up with the bishop due to the pin here. So here, queen b4, bishop d7. Here I play rook c5. I'm trying to put my queen on c3 because I don't want to have my queen lead the charge, because there is a rook here defending this pawn. So I play rook c5, and then here my opponent plays rook e8, trying to bring their knight back to e7. Here I play queen c3, knight e7. I take the knight, rook takes, and here I just simply I play g3. The reason why I played g3 here was because I realized that if I simply go in with a capture, and after we trade everything, I realized that in this endgame, after rook d7, there is a threat of back rank checkmate. And here after, let's say I play g3 here, then after rook d2, I can't actually defend this pawn. And I realized this was a massive problem, because then I have to give away my pawn, and the 2-on-1 here is not really favorable, because my opponent can probably win this a3 pawn as well. So here, I realized that there's no rush to capture this pawn, so I simply play the move g3. This rook on e7 can't get, it won't be able to get back to the defense of the c6 pawn, so I don't have to rush in order to win it. I give myself a flight square. So now after rook d8, let's say, then bishop takes, and once we trade everything, I guess a better variation to show this would be something like this. Let's say we trade everything, takes, and here after rook d7, now I don't have to worry about back rank checkmate. So here I can simply play rook c2, I can also play rook c5, attacking this pawn, and let's say you played rook d2, then I can capture this pawn on b5, defending this pawn, and defending e5, which is my other weakness, and I can slowly bring my king in, play h4, and win this pawn on a4 as well, and give myself 2 connected pass pawns on the queen side. So going back, instead, here my opponent plays not h5, but rook e8, and then here my opponent tries to go for some activity, plays queen b7. The idea is to try to use the fact that this g2 and f3 square are a bit weak, so if I move my rook, then you can probably play like queen f3, and you can come in with your queen, rook later, you can double up, etc. So here it's very important I don't move this rook on c6. So here I play h4, which actually isn't the best. In fact, actually the best move here is actually to move this rook to d6, in fact, because this just simply blocks off the open d file. And if you trade and rook d7, then here I can play something like computer suggesting rook d1, just put my rook behind the pawn. I can play queen e5, centralize, queen e4, queen c5. They're all possibilities here. So here, instead I play h4. Here my opponent plays rook d7, the correct move, doubling up on the open file. And now if I move my rook, that's actually a massive blunder, because here there is rook d1 check. And after rook captures on d1, rook captures on d1 after king h2. Here, pick your favorite way to checkmate. There's rook h1 checkmate, or alternatively, there's also queen h1 checkmate. So it's very important I don't move my rook on c6. Here, I play king h2, just simply getting out of the way, so I can actually move this rook, because I actually have like technically one extra move, because anything coming to the first rank won't actually come with check. Here, rook d2, I play rook c2. Here, my opponent attacks my queen. We shuffle a bit, my opponent tries to go for the drop. I decline with queen e1. And here, my opponent plays rook d1, queen e2. Here, my opponent tries to open up things with b4, and I capture. And after queen captures on b4, I set a nasty trap with rook to c8. Here, my trap is that this rook is on d1 is actually now undefended. And here, my opponent falls for the trap. After queen e4, here I can simply capture the rook on d1. You can't actually capture because there's actually a pin here on the king on g1. So it's very important that here you actually play something like, so after rook d8, it's very important you play something like rook d7, get this rook out of the harm's way. And after we trade, then I'm up a pawn here, but black has a lot of activity and can probably it's only a +1 advantage now, which is still, I guess, representative of the pawn. But it's a bit more difficult for me to push for anything. Instead, after queen captures on b4, here I play rook c8. And after queen e4, I play queen captures on d1. And at this point, my opponent simply accepts their fate and just plays rook f8, which leads to rook captures on f8, king captures on f8, and here queen to d8 is indeed checkmate. All the squares are now covered, and this is now checkmate. So what to say about this game? In general, I feel like the beginning part of this game, up until, let's see, around, we'll say after like the first 20-ish moves, we'll say, like up until this point, everything here I was very happy with. And I guess due to low time and time pressure and factors like this, here I blundered a little bit into somewhat of like a more equalish position. I'm still better, like clearly, but because I'm up a pawn mainly, but it becomes a lot more difficult to win because I give my opponent a lot of activity. But in general, I'm still pretty happy with this game. And in fact, this was actually my first win in this whole tournament, because in the first 3 rounds, I played terribly. I drew 2 1600s and lost to a 1700. And so finally, I got a win. Even though it wasn't against the highest rated opponent, it still felt good to finally regain a little bit of form and manage to convert a win. So that moves my score, I guess, in terms of the whole tournament to 2 out of 4. And let's see what I can do in round 5. See you guys all there in that recap. Thanks for watching.